We're often asked in an independent Alberta, would we be landlocked? Obviously, we're not right beside a port, we're not right beside the ocean, and so people have legitimate questions about whether or not we could ship our goods across the oceans. We particularly talk about oil, considering that is by far our largest export out of Alberta. But let's take the point in hand. Is Alberta landlocked? By definition, yes, we're not near a port. But the real problem is that we're policy locked. Intrusive and invasive regulations and rules from the federal government in Ottawa mean that we can't get our goods where they need to go, or at least not in the capacity that they should be flowing out of Alberta. So it's not so much that we're landlocked. In fact, we're policy locked from the federal government. Now, with regards to oil, and most other goods for that matter, we tend to believe that all of it is shipped to Vancouver or to the east and then is loaded onto tankers and shipped across the ocean. Now, of course, some goods do that, but on the whole, 90+% of our trade is facilitated with America, which is, of course, south of us. The same is true of oil. In fact, 98% of Canada's oil exports head south of the border, not across the oceans. The reason for this is quite clear. Firstly, we're close to America, and so it makes sense to ship oil. Secondly, we have so much oil and other product here in Alberta that we actually refine more than we need. And so what we do is we take the extra oil and we export it down south. Predominantly, we do this using pipelines. It's safe, it's efficient, it's cost effective, and it just makes sense. Where that oil goes depends on the market. For the most part, most of it is shipped to the Midwest, where massive refineries take what we have, which is heavy sour, and turn it into usable product. But some of it also goes to the Gulf Coast. In fact, the Gulf Coast in America is the largest market for heavy sour oil, which is predominantly what we have in Alberta, in the world. And so we'd like to get a lot of that oil down south to the heavy, or down south to the Gulf Coast. However, as you know, we have a problem. We can't build the pipeline capacity necessary to do so. Keystone XL would have been a welcome addition to this. Of course, as all of us know, the federal government in America blocked that pipeline. But what did Canada do about it? In fact, right after Keystone XL was cancelled, Mr. Trudeau in Ottawa appointed Stephen Guilbeault, who is a noted anti-pipeline activist, to Minister for the Environment and Climate Change. What I mean to say is, it's not like the federal government in Ottawa put up much of a fight for Alberta. Why then would independence solve this problem? Well, the most important thing to understand is that we would have what we do not have now, which is leverage. At present, Alberta simply has no leverage in Confederation. The federal government rules what energy project we can construct, pipeline construction through Bill C-69, and other measures that greatly restrict our trade and our exports of oil and other product. But in an independent Alberta, you could get rid of all of that. You could make it so that the government would be not only forced to champion Alberta oil and Alberta product, but also, in fact, you could take them out of the regulatory process entirely. In fact, you have to take them out of the regulatory process entirely. The reason for this is trade and goods and shipping oil, pipelines, etc. These are not partisan issues. They are objectively good things. At present, however, the government has made them into partisan issues. Now, they might say that we're going to approve this pipeline or disapprove this pipeline. We're going to build this energy project or not build this energy project because it's in the public interest to do so or not. But as you and I know, the public interest simply means whatever is in the interest of the federal government or of the MPs in the federal government. Considering we have a liberal government in power, considering that they're forming a coalition or have formed a coalition with the NDP, both parties which whom are noted anti-oil and anti-energy, then it doesn't make sense for them to build a pipeline or to build new energy projects, and so they won't. This introduces serious uncertainty into the energy market in Alberta and in Canada. Investors are scared to invest in a product or a pipeline or a project that might take 15 to 20 years to recoup for their investment. What happens if 5 or 10 years down the line, the federal government shuts that project down? In this, it's as though we're locked up, you see, not because of land, but rather because of policy. But if you could make it so that the federal government in Alberta, in an independent Alberta, was independent of that process, well, then serious certainty would be introduced into the market. Investors would know what is going to happen today, and they would know what was going to happen in 5 or 10 years. And so they'd be much more conducive to investing in Alberta and shipping goods across the continent. More than that, when we return to Alberta's position on leverage, at present I said we have none, and that's true. But what if we became independent? Suppose that we needed to get goods across the ocean, like grain, for example. How would we do so if Canada, after our independence, decided not to play nice, so to say? Well, we would have leverage. We could flex our economic muscle. Here's an example. Firstly, pipelines travel both east and west from Alberta to massive refineries in Canada. Some of the pipelines, or the Trans Mountain Pipeline, goes to Burnaby to be refined for jet fuel. Enbridge heads west towards Toronto and towards Montreal to be refined there. What if Alberta was independent and Canada said, no more access to port? Well, firstly, of course, we could turn off the taps and slow them and say, unless you give us access, we will not ship you the oil that you so desperately need. And make no mistake, they do need it. But secondly, we also know that Vancouver, for example, is one of the largest ports in the continent. A vast variety of goods come into that port and then are shipped across the country to Toronto and Montreal and Manitoba, Saskatchewan, etc. Again, if Canada decided to not play nice and to block our access to port, well, then we could simply put a tariff on every single good that passes through Alberta from the port, or every single good that passes through Alberta going to the Vancouver port. And even if then the federal government still wouldn't give us access, we could block shipments of goods from Vancouver to the east or the east to Vancouver entirely. That would surely get the federal government's attention. And lastly, there are international charters and treaties as well. Articles 124 and 125 of the UN state that a landlocked nation has to have access to ports, to tidewater. And this would be true in Alberta as well. We would see absolutely no reason why it shouldn't be. And so instead of thinking that Alberta would be at a disadvantage when independent when it comes to landlocking, we see the opposite would be true. Alberta, for the first time in its history, would have leverage and would be able to make its own way. It would be able to flex its economic muscle and generate the best outcome for Albertans as a whole.